Hello?
So what'd you do before the world ended?
I was kissing my wife, playing with my dog, wondering every day how I got so lucky. The world that was doesn't exist.
It's just us, trying to hold on to what was.
But out there,
It's kill or be killed.
drink up. There's a new bunch in town. They're going after everything that's left. What do you expect to find? Something better than this.
The dream.
Shoot the roof!
Welcome back to Hollybuzz, your destination for detailed movie breakdowns, Hollywood news, and everything you need to know about the biggest films making headlines around the world. Today, we are turning our attention to one of the most intriguing films of 2026, The Dog Stars, a post-apocalyptic thriller directed by legendary filmmaker Ridley Scott. The film is based on Peter Heller's acclaimed novel and takes audiences into a world where civilization has been devastated by a deadly pandemic, leaving only a small number of survivors struggling to build a life in an unfamiliar and dangerous world. At the center of this story is Hig, played by Jacob Elordi, a young pilot who has survived the collapse of society. Alongside him is Bangley, a hardened military survivalist portrayed by Josh Brolin. Together they have created an isolated existence where survival depends on caution, preparation, and constant vigilance. But everything changes when Hig discovers a mysterious radio transmission, a signal that could represent something far more important than simple communication. It gives him a reason to leave the relative safety of his home and venture into an uncertain world in search of hope and human connection. What makes The Dog Stars particularly fascinating is that it is not simply another post-apocalyptic survival story. Beneath its dangerous landscapes and survival elements lies a deeper question. What does it mean to remain human when the world around you has lost its humanity? The film explores isolation, survival, trust, companionship, hope, and the possibility of rebuilding something meaningful after civilization has collapsed. The movie brings together an impressive ensemble cast, including Margaret Qualley, Guy Pearce, Benedict Wong, and Allison Janney, alongside Elordi and Brolin. The combination of Ridley Scott's filmmaking experience, a compelling literary source, and a talented cast makes this one of the notable science fiction and thriller releases of 2026. In today's complete Hollybuzz breakdown, we are going to explore this movie from every important angle. We will look at its story and concept, the characters, the inspiration behind the film, its production, filming locations, trailer, performances, themes, symbolism, visual effects, soundtrack, audience and critical response, and much more. So whether you are already a fan of Ridley Scott, a follower of Jacob Elordi, a reader of Peter Heller's novel, or simply someone who enjoys intense post-apocalyptic stories, stay with us because we are going deep into the world of The Dog Stars. 2026. This is Hollybuzz, and let's begin our journey into a world where survival is instinct, but humanity is a choice. What this video covers. In today's video, we are taking a complete and detailed look at The Dog Stars, 2026. This is not going to be a simple movie summary or a short review. Instead, we are going to explore the film from multiple angles so that by the end of this video, you will have a much clearer understanding of the movie, its story, its characters, its production, and the ideas behind it. We will begin by introducing the movie and looking at its basic identity, including its genre, overall concept, and the world in which the story takes place. From there, we will explore the background of the project and understand where the idea for The Dog Stars came from and why this particular story was brought to the screen. We will then move into the people behind the movie. We will discuss the director, writers, producers, and the creative team responsible for transforming the original concept into a cinematic experience. We will also take a closer look at the cast, including the main actors and supporting performers, and examine the important roles they play within the story. Another major part of this video will focus on the film's characters. We will examine their personalities, motivations, relationships, strengths, weaknesses, and development throughout the story. Understanding these characters is particularly important in a survival story, because the emotional choices of the characters are often just as important as the external dangers surrounding them. We will also explore the movie's production, including its filming locations, behind-the-scenes details, filmmaking challenges, cinematography, visual effects, and overall visual presentation. These elements help us understand how the filmmakers created the post-apocalyptic world shown on screen. After that, we will examine the trailer and the audience's reaction to it, including the details that attracted viewers' attention and the expectations created before the movie's release. We will then move toward the deeper side of the film. This includes its major themes, symbolism, important scenes, memorable moments, hidden details, and Easter eggs. We will look beyond the surface-level survival story and explore what the movie is trying to communicate about humanity, loneliness, hope, fear, relationships, and the struggle to remain human in a broken world. Finally, we will discuss the movie's strengths and weaknesses, its performances, critical response, audience reception, lessons, and overall impact. We will also look at its future possibilities and finish with our final verdict on whether The Dog Stars 2026 is worth watching. So this video is designed to give you a complete journey through The Dog Stars, from its origins and production to its characters, story, themes, performances, reception, and final evaluation. Stay with us until the end, because there is a lot to discover in this mysterious post-apocalyptic world, right here on Hollybuzz. Movie Overview. The Dog Stars 2026 is an upcoming post-apocalyptic thriller directed by Ridley Scott and based on the acclaimed 2012 novel, The Dog Stars by American author Peter Heller. The film presents a world that has been devastated by a deadly pandemic, leaving civilization severely damaged and only a small number of people struggling to survive. At the center of the story is Hig, played by Jacob Elordi, a former pilot who lives in an isolated home with his loyal dog. After the collapse of society, Hig has adapted to a harsh new reality where survival depends on constant vigilance, limited resources, and the ability to protect himself from dangerous people. Hig is not completely alone. He lives with Bangley, played by Josh Brolin, a heavily armed and extremely cautious survivalist. The two men have very different personalities and approaches to life, but their partnership helps them survive. In a world where trust has become increasingly difficult, the story takes a significant turn when Hig hears a mysterious transmission over his radio. The signal suggests that there may still be another part of the world where communication and perhaps civilization itself continues to exist. For Hig, this discovery becomes much more than a simple radio signal. It represents the possibility of connection, purpose, and hope. Instead of remaining safely isolated, Hig decides to investigate the transmission. His journey takes him away from the limited security of his home and into an unpredictable world filled with danger. Along the way, the story explores the tension between survival and the human desire to reconnect with other people. One of the most interesting aspects of The Dog Stars is that its post-apocalyptic setting is not simply used as an excuse for action. The film is built around the emotional and psychological consequences of living after civilization has collapsed. It asks what happens to people's identities, relationships, morality, and hopes when the systems that once supported society disappear. The relationship between Hig and his dog is also an important part of the story's emotional foundation. In a world where human relationships have become dangerous and uncertain, companionship takes on a completely different meaning. The bond between a person and an animal becomes a symbol of loyalty, trust, and the parts of humanity that survive even after society has fallen apart. The film features an ensemble cast that includes Margaret Qualley, Guy Pearce, Benedict Wong, and Allison Janney, alongside Jacob Elordi and Josh Brolin. Their presence expands the world beyond Hig's isolated existence and introduces different perspectives on survival and human connection. Visually, the movie promises to combine the enormous scale associated with Ridley Scott's filmmaking, with the intimate atmosphere of a survival drama, the contrast between vast landscapes and isolated characters, helps emphasize how small humanity can appear after a catastrophic collapse. Ultimately, The Dog Stars is a story about survival, but survival is only the beginning. Beneath its post-apocalyptic setting lies a deeper exploration of loneliness, companionship, trust, hope, and the human need to find meaning after losing almost everything. The central question is not simply whether Hig can survive the world that remains. The more important question is whether, in a world where civilization has disappeared, he can still find a reason to live and perhaps a reason to believe in humanity again. That combination of survival thriller, science fiction, and deeply human drama is what makes The Dog Stars 2026 one of the intriguing upcoming films to watch. Movie genre. The Dog Stars 2026 can be described primarily as a post-apocalyptic thriller, with strong elements of science fiction, survival drama, and adventure. The combination of these genres gives the movie a distinctive identity, because it is not simply about surviving a destroyed world. It also explores the psychological and emotional consequences of living in that world. The first and most important genre is post-apocalyptic fiction. This genre focuses on life after a catastrophic event has fundamentally changed or destroyed civilization. In The Dog Stars, the world has been devastated by a pandemic, and the remaining survivors must adapt to an environment where the structures of ordinary society have largely disappeared. The post-apocalyptic setting creates an atmosphere of uncertainty, isolation, and constant danger. The second major genre is the thriller. Suspense is created through uncertainty about what might happen next. Characters cannot easily determine whom they can trust or what dangers may be waiting beyond their immediate surroundings. This uncertainty keeps the audience emotionally engaged and creates tension throughout the story. The film also contains strong elements of science fiction. Although the story is grounded in human survival, it takes place in a future shaped by a catastrophic event that has transformed civilization. Science fiction storytelling allows the filmmakers to examine how humanity might respond when familiar systems disappear and the world becomes radically different. Another important genre is survival drama. This aspect focuses on the emotional and psychological struggle of people trying to stay alive under extreme circumstances. Survival is not presented simply as physical endurance. It also involves difficult decisions, relationships, trust, fear, loneliness, and the question of what makes life worth continuing. There is also an element of adventure. Once the characters move beyond the security of their isolated environment, the story becomes a journey into an uncertain world. This creates opportunities for exploration, discovery, and encounters with unfamiliar people and situations. What makes the genre combination particularly interesting is the balance between external danger and internal conflict. A typical action-oriented post-apocalyptic movie might concentrate mainly on violence, destruction, and survival tactics. The Dog Stars, however, is also concerned with the emotional consequences of isolation and the human desire for connection. The movie, therefore, occupies a space between a survival thriller and a character-driven science fiction drama. The post-apocalyptic setting provides the environment. The thriller elements create suspense. The survival aspect creates immediate stakes, and the dramatic elements give the story emotional depth. This mixture of genres also reflects the tone of Peter Heller's original novel. The story uses the ruined world not merely as a spectacular backdrop, but as a way to examine loneliness, memory, companionship, and hope. So, rather than placing The Dog Stars into just one category, it is more accurate to describe it as a post-apocalyptic survival thriller with science fiction, adventure, and dramatic elements. This combination allows the movie to deliver suspense and danger, while still giving considerable importance to the human experience at the center of the story. The Dog Stars 2026 is scheduled to be released in theaters on August 28, 2026. The film is being developed as a major theatrical release, giving audiences the opportunity to experience Ridley Scott's post-apocalyptic world on the big screen. The August release places the movie within the important summer-to-fall transition period, a time when major studios often release highly anticipated films. The scheduled release date is particularly significant because the movie brings together several major creative names. Ridley Scott is directing, while Jacob Elordi and Josh Brolin lead the cast. The film is also adapted from Peter Heller's acclaimed novel, giving it an established literary foundation. For fans of post-apocalyptic science fiction and survival thrillers, August 28, 2026 is therefore an important date to remember. However, as with any upcoming production, release schedules can sometimes change because of distribution, plans, or other industry circumstances. The official studio announcement remains the best source for any future changes. So mark your calendars. The Dog Stars arrives in theaters on August 28, 2026. Runtime. Now let's talk about one of the basic but important details of The Dog Stars 2026, its runtime. When audiences look forward to a major movie, they naturally want to know how long the complete cinematic experience will be. However, in the case of The Dog Stars, the official running time has not yet been publicly confirmed by the studio. Since the movie is still an upcoming release, it would not be accurate to present an estimated number of minutes as the confirmed runtime. The runtime of a film is more important than it may initially appear. It determines how much time the filmmakers have to develop the story, establish the world, introduce the characters, build suspense, and bring the narrative to its conclusion. For a movie like The Dog Stars, which combines post-apocalyptic survival, thriller elements, science fiction, and character-driven drama, the filmmakers need enough screen time to allow the story to develop naturally without making the movie feel unnecessarily rushed or stretched. A post-apocalyptic story can require considerable time for world building. The audience needs to understand the environment in which the characters are living, the condition of society, and the challenges created by the changed world. At the same time, the movie needs to maintain suspense and forward momentum. This makes the final runtime an important creative decision for the director and editing team because every additional scene must contribute something meaningful to the overall experience. Another factor is the balance between action and character development. A movie can become visually impressive through large-scale sequences, but audiences also need time to understand the emotional motivations of the characters. In The Dog Stars, the survival environment and the relationships between the characters are important parts of the storytelling. The final cut, therefore, needs to give sufficient attention to both the external dangers and the internal experiences of the characters. It is also worth remembering that a film's runtime is normally finalized relatively late in the filmmaking process. During editing, scenes can be shortened, extended, rearranged, or removed completely. Additional editing and post-production work can therefore change the final length of the movie before its theatrical release. This is why an unofficial runtime circulating online should not automatically be treated as the final confirmed figure. For Hollybuzz, the most accurate information we can give our audience at this stage is that the official runtime of The Dog Stars 2026 has not yet been announced. Rather than giving viewers a guessed number, it is better to wait for the official theatrical listing or studio announcement. Once the final runtime is officially revealed, it will give audiences a clearer idea of how much time Ridley Scott and his creative team have devoted to telling this post-apocalyptic story. Production companies. When we talk about the production of The Dog Stars 2026, one of the most important names connected to the project is 20th Century Studios. The studio is responsible for bringing the film to the big screen and is part of the larger Disney Entertainment Group. With a long history of producing major films across different genres, 20th Century Studios provides the large-scale production and distribution infrastructure required for a project of this size. The movie is also associated with Scott Free Productions, the production company founded by filmmaker Ridley Scott and his late brother, Tony Scott. Scott Free has been involved in numerous major film and television projects and is particularly known for supporting ambitious stories with strong visual identities. Having Scott Free involved in The Dog Stars is especially significant because Ridley Scott is directing the film, allowing his creative vision to influence the project from both the directing and production sides. The involvement of these companies is important because making a large-scale post-apocalyptic movie requires much more than simply filming scenes with actors. A production of this type requires extensive planning, location management, set construction, cinematography, costume design, stunt coordination, visual effects, sound design, editing, and post-production. Production companies coordinate these different departments and provide the organizational structure necessary to bring all of these elements together. Another important responsibility of the production companies is managing the film's overall resources. A movie involving a post-apocalyptic environment needs to create a convincing world that feels authentic to the audience. This can involve designing abandoned environments, preparing specialized equipment, organizing large production crews, and coordinating practical and digital filmmaking techniques. The production companies help ensure that these creative ambitions remain achievable within the project's schedule and resources. The companies involved also play an important role in supporting the filmmakers. A director may have a particular artistic vision, but turning that vision into a finished feature film requires collaboration between producers, studio executives, department heads, editors, visual effects artists, cinematographers, and many other professionals. The production structure allows these different teams to work toward the same final goal. For the Dog Stars, the combination of 20th Century Studios and Scott Free Productions is particularly interesting because it brings together the resources of a major Hollywood studio with the creative identity associated with Ridley, Scott's production company. This gives the film both the support of an established studio system and the involvement of a filmmaker with extensive experience in large-scale cinematic storytelling. The production companies are therefore not simply names appearing in the opening or closing credits. They are part of the larger filmmaking process that makes the entire project possible, from organizing the production and supporting the creative team to preparing the movie for audiences. Around the world, their contribution is essential to transforming the Dog Stars from a literary story into a major cinematic production. So, when discussing the production companies behind the Dog Stars 2026, the key names to remember are 20th Century Studios and Scott Free Productions. Their involvement represents the combination of major studio, filmmaking resources, and Ridley Scott's established production background, making them an important part of the movie's journey from concept to cinema. Now let's talk about the filmmaker sitting behind the camera of the Dog Stars. 2026, one of the most influential directors in modern cinema, Ridley Scott. His involvement immediately gives this project a different level of attention because Scott has spent decades creating films that combine powerful storytelling with ambitious visual worlds. With the Dog Stars, he once again turns his attention toward a challenging and atmospheric story, this time entering the world of post-apocalyptic survival and human isolation. Ridley Scott was born in 1937 in South Shields, England, and developed an interest in visual storytelling long before becoming one of Hollywood's most recognized directors. He studied art and later became involved in television and commercial filmmaking, where he developed an exceptionally strong visual style. His experience in advertising became particularly important to his filmmaking career because it taught him how to communicate ideas through composition, lighting, production design, movement, and carefully controlled imagery. These qualities would later become some of the defining characteristics of his feature films. Scott made his feature film breakthrough with The Duelists in 1977, but it was his next major project that established him as an important filmmaker on the international stage. In 1979, he directed Alien, a science fiction horror film that became enormously influential. The movie demonstrated Scott's ability to create tension through atmosphere and visual design rather than relying only on traditional action. The dark industrial environments, carefully constructed sets, controlled lighting, and slow building suspense helped establish a cinematic style that audiences and filmmakers would continue to admire for decades. Scott followed Alien with another landmark film, Blade Runner, released in 1982. Although the movie was initially met with a complicated response, it eventually became regarded as one of the most influential science fiction films ever made. Its futuristic city, atmospheric cinematography, production design, and philosophical questions about humanity and identity demonstrated Scott's ability to combine visual spectacle with deeper ideas. This combination is particularly relevant when considering his approach to a story like The Dog Stars, where the environment and the psychological condition of the characters are closely connected. Over the course of his career, Ridley Scott has demonstrated remarkable versatility. He has worked across science fiction, historical drama, action, crime, biography, thriller, and epic filmmaking. His filmography includes major productions such as Gladiator, Black Hawk Down, Kingdom of Heaven, American Gangster, Prometheus, The Martian, Alien, Covenant, The Last Duel, and Napoleon. Each project has presented different storytelling challenges, but Scott has consistently maintained his interest in creating visually distinctive, cinematic worlds. One of Scott's greatest strengths as a director is his attention to visual storytelling. He does not treat the camera simply as a device for recording performances. Instead, the framing, lighting, production design, environment, and movement of the camera often contribute directly to the story. A location can communicate danger, loneliness, wealth, power, or uncertainty before a character even speaks. This approach is especially valuable for a post-apocalyptic story because the condition of the world itself becomes an important part of the narrative. Another defining characteristic of Scott's filmmaking is his ability to create a strong sense of atmosphere. His films frequently place characters inside environments that feel enormous, dangerous, mysterious, or unfamiliar. Rather than explaining everything through dialogue, he often allows audiences to discover the world visually. This can make viewers feel as though they are physically present inside the story, rather than simply watching events happen from a distance. Scott is also known for working on projects that explore human beings under extreme circumstances. In Alien, characters face an unknown and terrifying threat. In Black Hawk Down, soldiers confront the chaos and danger of war. In The Martian, a scientist must survive alone in an extraordinarily hostile environment. In Gladiator, a man must endure political betrayal and personal loss while fighting for his survival and dignity. Although these stories are completely different, they share an interest in how people respond when their normal lives are disrupted by forces beyond their control. That aspect of Scott's career makes The Dog Stars a particularly interesting project for him. The story places its characters in a world where civilization has been severely damaged and survival has become a daily challenge. This provides Scott with an environment where his strengths in atmosphere, world building, visual storytelling, and human-centered drama can work together. Another important quality of Ridley Scott is his willingness to work on large and demanding productions. His films often require extensive coordination between cinematography, production design, costume departments, visual effects, stunt teams, sound designers, editors, and actors. Managing all of these departments while maintaining a consistent artistic vision is one of the major responsibilities of a director, and Scott's long career demonstrates his ability to operate on this scale. For The Dog Stars, Scott is not simply adapting a post-apocalyptic story into a conventional action movie. His reputation suggests that the environment, atmosphere, and emotional condition of the characters will be important parts of the cinematic experience. The director's challenge is to make the world feel dangerous and believable while still keeping the audience emotionally connected to the people living inside it. It is also important to understand that Ridley Scott has a long relationship with science, fiction, and speculative storytelling. His work in Alien, Blade Runner, Prometheus, The Martian, and Alien Covenant demonstrates his ability to create worlds that are visually impressive while asking questions about humanity, survival, technology, identity, and the future. The Dog Stars gives him another opportunity to explore a transformed world, but this time the central threat is closely connected to the collapse of human civilization itself. Ultimately, Ridley Scott's role as director is one of the most significant creative elements of The Dog Stars. His decades of experience, visual discipline, interest in challenging environments, and ability to combine spectacle with human drama make him a natural filmmaker for a story built around survival and uncertainty. For Hollybuzz, the most important thing to remember about Ridley Scott is that he is not simply a director, known for making visually impressive movies. He is a filmmaker who has repeatedly used visual worlds to explore human nature. Whether his characters are trapped in space, fighting on a battlefield, surviving on another planet, navigating ancient empires, or living in a devastated future, Scott's cinema repeatedly asks a fundamental question. How do human beings behave when they are pushed beyond the limits of ordinary life? That question makes his involvement in The Dog Stars particularly exciting, because the film gives Ridley Scott another opportunity to explore survival, isolation, danger, and humanity through his distinctive cinematic vision. Now let's talk about the writer and screenplay of The Dog Stars 2026. Because the writing is one of the most important foundations of any movie, even the most talented director, the biggest stars, and the most impressive visual effects cannot make a film successful if the screenplay does not provide a strong story, believable characters, meaningful conflict, and a clear emotional direction. The screenplay for The Dog Stars was written by Mark L. Smith, who adapted the story from the acclaimed novel of the same name by Peter Heller. The official information from 20th Century Studios confirms Mark L. Smith as the film's screenwriter and identifies Peter Heller's best-selling novel as the source material. This distinction between the novelist and the screenwriter is important. Peter Heller created the original story, characters, world, and central ideas in his novel, while Mark L. Smith's responsibility was to transform that literary material into a screenplay that could work on the big screen. A novel and a screenplay are very different forms of storytelling. A book can spend pages exploring a character's thoughts, memories, emotions, and observations, while a screenplay has to communicate much of that information through dialogue, action, performance, visual storytelling, and cinematic situations. Mark L. Smith is an experienced screenwriter whose career includes several major films. One of his best-known works is The Revenant, the survival drama directed by Alejandro González Iñárritu. His writing credits also include projects such as Overlord and other films built around intense situations, physical danger, survival, and human conflict. His experience with stories involving extreme circumstances makes him a particularly interesting writer for The Dog Stars. The screenplay presents a world in which civilization has been dramatically disrupted, but the writing is not simply concerned with showing destruction. The story is built around the people who remain and the choices they have to make. That gives the screenplay an important emotional dimension. The audience is not only asked to think about what happened to the world, it is also encouraged to think about what happens
To human beings when the world
they once understood disappears. When one of the major challenges of adapting The Dog Stars was deciding what material from Peter Heller's novel should be retained and what material needed to be changed or condensed for a feature film. Novels can contain extensive descriptions and internal thoughts that cannot always be transferred directly to the screen. A screenwriter has to identify the central emotional and dramatic elements and then construct scenes that allow audiences to experience those ideas visually. The screenplay also has to establish a strong balance between survival, suspense, and character drama. If the story concentrates entirely on survival, the characters may feel emotionally distant. If it focuses too heavily on personal reflection, the pace can become slow. The writing, therefore, needs to create situations where the external dangers and the characters' internal struggles influence one another. Another important element is the development of Hig, the central character. His journey is not simply about physically surviving in a dangerous world. His decisions are connected to his desire for communication, companionship, and the possibility that something better may still exist beyond his isolated life. The screenplay, therefore, has to make his motivations understandable to the audience, so that his choices feel emotionally convincing rather than simply serving the plot. The relationship between characters is also an important part of the screenplay. In a story where society has largely collapsed, relationships become more complicated because trust is no longer guaranteed. People have to decide whom they can depend on and what risks they are willing to take for another person. These conflicts give the screenplay opportunities to explore loyalty, fear, suspicion, friendship, and human connection. The screenplay's adaptation of the novel is, therefore, not simply a matter of transferring the book's events onto the screen. It involves translating literary storytelling into cinematic storytelling. A character's internal thoughts may become an expression, a decision, a piece of dialogue, or a visual moment. A long description of a landscape may become a carefully composed shot. A complicated emotional idea may be communicated through the interaction between two characters, rather than through narration. This is where the collaboration between Mark L. Smith and Ridley Scott becomes particularly interesting. Smith provides the screenplay and dramatic structure, while Scott brings his own visual interpretation to that material as director. The screenplay gives the movie its foundation, while the director, actors, cinematographer, editors, production designers, and other departments transform that foundation into the finished cinematic experience. Another important point is that Peter Heller's involvement remains connected to the film because the movie originates from his novel. His original work provides the literary foundation, while Smith's screenplay serves as the bridge between the novel and the screen. This creates three important creative stages: Heller's original story, Smith's adaptation, and Scott's cinematic interpretation. Ultimately, the screenplay of The Dog Stars is important because it has to make a very large, post-apocalyptic concept feel personal. The collapse of civilization is the setting, but the real dramatic focus is on the people living through that collapse. Their fears, decisions, relationships, memories, and hopes are what give the story its emotional weight. So, when we talk about the writing of the Dog Stars, the key names to remember are Peter Heller, the author of the original novel, and Mark L. Smith, the screenwriter responsible for adapting that material for cinema. Their combined contribution provides the story with its literary foundation and its cinematic structure, while Ridley Scott brings that screenplay to life as the director. For Hollybuzz, this is an important part of understanding the movie because before the cameras started rolling, before the actors performed their roles, and before the visual effects were created, there had to be a screenplay capable of turning Peter Heller's post-apocalyptic world into a compelling cinematic story. That screenplay is the foundation upon which the rest of the Dog Stars is built. Now, let's talk about one of the most interesting questions surrounding The Dog Stars 2026. Why was this movie made? What was the reason for bringing Peter Heller's post-apocalyptic story from the pages of a novel to the big screen? At its heart, The Dog Stars was made to explore a very human question. What happens to people when the world they once knew disappears? The movie presents a future in which a devastating pandemic has destroyed much of civilization, but the purpose of the story is not simply to show destruction or create another action-packed disaster film. Instead, the filmmakers use this extraordinary situation to examine human behavior, survival, loneliness, trust, companionship, and the possibility of hope after a catastrophe. One of the major reasons for adapting the story is the strength of Peter Heller's original novel. The book offers a distinctive approach to the post-apocalyptic genre by concentrating heavily on the emotional and psychological experience of its characters. Rather than making the collapse of civilization the only attraction, the story asks what remains when familiar institutions, communities, and social structures disappear. Bringing this material to cinema gives audiences an opportunity to experience that world, visually and emotionally. The film was also an opportunity for Ridley Scott to return to the kind of ambitious, atmospheric storytelling that has been an important part of his career. Scott has repeatedly explored worlds where human beings are placed in extreme circumstances. His films often combine large-scale visual filmmaking with questions about survival, humanity, and the future. The Dog Stars gives him another environment in which he can explore these ideas, but from a more grounded and intimate, post-apocalyptic perspective. Another reason for making the movie is the opportunity to explore survival beyond physical survival. In a disaster story, staying alive is obviously important, but the film also asks whether simply surviving is enough. What happens when a person has food, shelter, weapons, and security but has lost meaningful human connection? Can someone truly live without relationships, purpose, or hope? These questions give the movie a deeper emotional foundation. The story also provides an opportunity to explore the importance of companionship. When civilization collapses, relationships become extremely valuable. Trust becomes difficult, and isolation can become just as dangerous psychologically as physical threats are. Through its characters and their connections, the film can examine why human beings continue to search for companionship even when reaching out to others may involve enormous risks. Another important purpose behind the movie is to make audiences think about human resilience. A catastrophic event can destroy buildings, institutions, and systems, but it does not necessarily destroy the human desire to rebuild. People continue searching for meaning, connection, and a reason to move forward. The movie uses its post-apocalyptic setting to explore this resilience and the possibility that humanity can continue even after experiencing enormous loss. The film also allows audiences to think about the relationship between fear and hope. In a dangerous world, fear can encourage people to isolate themselves and protect what they have. Hope, however, can motivate them to take risks and search for something beyond immediate survival. This tension creates an important emotional foundation for the story and helps explain why the characters make difficult decisions. From a filmmaking perspective, the project also offers an opportunity to create a visually distinctive post-apocalyptic world. The collapse of civilization provides filmmakers with the chance to present environments that are very different from ordinary contemporary settings. Abandoned spaces, isolated landscapes, damaged infrastructure, and the contrast between nature and human civilization can all contribute to the film's atmosphere. Ultimately, The Dog Stars was made to be more than a movie about the end of the world. Its deeper purpose is to examine what happens to the human spirit when almost everything familiar has been taken away. By placing its characters in an extreme environment, the story can ask questions that are relevant even in the real world. What do we value? Whom do we trust? What makes life meaningful? And how do we continue when the future is uncertain? That is what makes the project interesting. The apocalypse is the setting, but humanity is the subject. The movie uses a destroyed world to examine the qualities that may survive even when civilization does not: love, loyalty, companionship, courage, memory, and hope. So when we ask why The Dog Stars was made, the answer goes much deeper than entertainment. It was an opportunity to transform Peter Heller's thought-provoking novel into a cinematic experience and use the post-apocalyptic genre to explore the human need for survival, connection, and meaning in a world where almost everything has changed. The primary inspiration behind The Dog Stars 2026 comes from Peter Heller's acclaimed novel, The Dog Stars, originally published in 2012. The movie is not an entirely new concept created specifically for Hollywood. It is a cinematic adaptation of Heller's literary work. The novel provided the foundation for the characters, the post-apocalyptic world, and the central ideas that the filmmakers have brought to the screen. Peter Heller's inspiration for the story was closely connected to his interest in nature, wilderness, isolation, and human survival. Rather than imagining the apocalypse only through enormous explosions and destroyed cities, Heller approached the idea from a more personal perspective. He was interested in what everyday life might look like for an individual who has survived a catastrophic event and is forced to live in a dramatically changed world. This approach gives The Dog Stars a different identity from many conventional post-apocalyptic stories. The inspiration is not simply the idea of a world being destroyed, it is the idea of a world becoming unfamiliar. The familiar systems that people normally depend upon, communities, institutions, communication networks, transportation, and ordinary social routines, can suddenly disappear. The story then asks how an individual adapts when almost every part of normal life has been removed. Another major source of inspiration is the relationship between human beings and the natural world. After civilization collapses, nature becomes much more prominent in everyday life. The landscape is no longer simply something people pass through on their way to work or school. It becomes a source of food, shelter, danger, beauty, and uncertainty. This creates an interesting contrast between the destruction of human civilization and the continuing presence of the natural environment. The original novel also draws inspiration from the idea of solitude. The protagonist's isolated existence allows the story to explore what prolonged loneliness can do to a person's thoughts and emotions. In ordinary life, people are surrounded by communication and social interaction. But when that disappears, even a simple human voice can become incredibly meaningful. This idea helps explain the emotional importance of communication within the story. The presence of a dog is another important part of the inspiration and identity of the story. The title itself points toward the relationship between humans and animals in a world where human civilization has been severely damaged. A dog represents companionship, loyalty, familiarity, and emotional connection. In an environment where trusting other people can be dangerous, the bond between a human being and an animal can become especially powerful. The story is also inspired by the broader tradition of post-apocalyptic literature. For decades, writers and filmmakers have imagined what society might look like after wars, pandemics, environmental disasters, or other catastrophic events. But The Dog Stars approaches this tradition from a more intimate angle. Instead of making the collapse of civilization the only spectacle, it asks what the collapse means for an individual human being. The concept of a pandemic is particularly significant. The novel was published years before the COVID-19 pandemic, which means its central premise was not originally created as a direct response to COVID-19. However, after the real-world experience of a global pandemic, audiences may naturally find certain aspects of the story more relevant and emotionally recognizable. The fictional catastrophe can therefore encourage viewers to think differently about vulnerability, isolation, communication, and the importance of social connections. Another important inspiration is the universal human desire to find meaning after loss. When a person loses family, friends, security, routine, and the familiar world around them, Survival alone may not be enough. There is a deeper need to discover something worth living for. This idea gives the story an emotional foundation that extends beyond the science fiction and survival genres. The movie's inspiration also becomes particularly interesting because of Ridley Scott's involvement. Scott has spent much of his career creating stories about human beings, confronting extraordinary circumstances. His previous work in science, fiction, and survival-oriented cinema demonstrates his interest in worlds where normal human existence is challenged. His interpretation of the dog stars therefore brings another layer to the original material, particularly through his emphasis on atmosphere, visual world building, and human behavior under pressure. The adaptation is ultimately inspired by a combination of literature, survival, nature, human psychology, isolation, companionship, and the question of what remains after civilization collapses. These ideas give the movie a foundation that is much broader than a simple disaster scenario. What makes the inspiration behind the dog stars particularly interesting is that the story does not treat the end of civilization as the end of humanity. Instead, it asks whether certain human qualities can survive even when society itself has been broken. Loyalty can survive. Memory can survive. Love can survive. Hope can survive. And perhaps most importantly, the desire to connect with another human being can survive. That is ultimately the central inspiration behind the dog stars. Not simply imagining the end of the world, but imagining what it means to remain human after the world has changed completely. The film takes Peter Heller's original literary vision and brings those ideas into a visual medium, giving audiences the opportunity to experience the isolation, danger, beauty, and emotional complexity of this post-apocalyptic world on the big screen. The Journey of the Dog Stars, 2026, began with Peter Heller's 2012 novel of the same name. The book established the post-apocalyptic world, its characters, and its central survival story, and over time it attracted attention as a strong piece of literary material for a potential film adaptation. Turning a novel into a major motion picture, however, requires a long development process, because the filmmakers have to transform a story written for the page into something that can work visually and dramatically on screen. As the project moved toward film development, one of the major creative challenges was finding the right filmmaker to translate Heller's world into cinema. The eventual choice of Ridley Scott became one of the most significant developments in the project's history. Scott's long experience with science fiction, survival stories, large-scale filmmaking, and atmospheric visual storytelling made him a natural fit for the material. The screenplay adaptation was handled by Mark L. Smith, who transformed Peter Heller's original novel into a feature film screenplay. This stage was particularly important because a novel can spend a great deal of time inside a character's thoughts and descriptions, whereas a movie must communicate much of that information through performances, dialogue, locations, cinematography, editing, and visual storytelling. As development progressed, the project also attracted a strong cast. Jacob Elordi was selected to play the central character, Hig, while Josh Brolin joined the film as Bangley. Additional cast members, including Margaret Qualley, Guy Pearce, Benedict Wong, and Allison Janney, expanded the ensemble and gave the production a significant level of acting talent. The casting process was an important part of development because the story depends heavily on its characters. The Dog Stars is not simply a film built around large-scale action. Much of its emotional power comes from the relationships between people living in an isolated and dangerous environment. Therefore, finding actors capable of communicating fear, determination, loneliness, trust, and emotional conflict was essential to bringing the screenplay to life. The production itself was developed as a major cinematic project involving 20th Century Studios and Scott Free Productions. With Ridley Scott directing, the film required coordination between numerous departments, including cinematography, production design, costume design, locations, sound, stunt work, editing, and visual effects. One of the major production challenges was creating a convincing post-apocalyptic environment. The filmmakers needed to present a world that felt as though modern civilization had been fundamentally disrupted. Rather than depending entirely on computer-generated imagery, a production of this scale can combine real locations, practical environments, constructed sets, and digital enhancement to create a believable world. The filming process also required careful attention to the physical environment. A story centered around survival needs its locations to feel authentic because the landscape becomes almost like another character. open wilderness, isolated structures, damaged environments, and the contrast between nature and human civilization all contribute to the atmosphere of the film. Another important part of production was the integration of practical filmmaking and visual effects. Modern post-apocalyptic films often require digital work to extend locations, modify environments, create large-scale destruction, or enhance scenes that cannot be safely achieved practically. The challenge is to ensure that these effects remain convincing and do not distract the audience from the story. The production also involved the normal stages of post-production, including editing, sound design, visual effects, music, and final picture finishing. This stage is where the various pieces of the movie are brought together. Individual performances, locations, action sequences, music, dialogue, and visual effects must all be carefully arranged to create a coherent final film. The editing process is particularly important for a story like The Dog Stars because the movie needs to maintain a balance between quiet, character moments and moments of danger or suspense. If the pacing becomes too slow, the tension can disappear. If it becomes too fast, the emotional side of the story may not receive enough attention. Finding that balance is one of the key responsibilities of the post-production team. Another important aspect of the project's development is its connection to a well-known literary source. Because Peter Heller's novel already has readers who know the story, the filmmakers face the additional responsibility of respecting the spirit of the original material while creating a movie that works independently for people who have never read the book. This means the production has to satisfy two different audiences. Readers may arrive with expectations based on the novel, while general moviegoers may experience the story for the first time. The filmmakers therefore need to preserve the essential identity of Heller's work while making decisions that are appropriate for the cinematic format. The final stages of production involve preparing the completed film for its theatrical release. This includes final editing, visual effects completion, sound mixing, marketing preparation, trailers, posters, promotional material, and distribution planning. Each of these stages contributes to how audiences ultimately experience the finished movie. The scheduled theatrical release of The Dog Stars is August 28, 2026, giving the production a clear destination after its long development and filmmaking process. Overall, the development and production history of The Dog Stars represents the transformation of a successful literary work into a major Hollywood film. It began with Peter Heller's novel, moved through screenplay development and creative planning, attracted Ridley Scott as director and an impressive ensemble cast, and progressed through the complex stages of filming and post-production. The result is a project that brings together literature, filmmaking, acting, visual design, technology, and large-scale production. For audiences, the finished movie represents only what appears on the screen. But behind those 2 hours of cinema lies a long process of development, decision-making, collaboration, and technical work involving hundreds of people. For The Dog Stars, 2026, the filming locations are particularly important because the movie depends heavily on creating a convincing post-apocalyptic world. The locations need to communicate isolation, emptiness, danger, and the feeling of a civilization that has been dramatically changed. Instead of making the environment feel like an ordinary modern setting, the filmmakers needed places that could convincingly represent a world where normal society has largely disappeared. The production was filmed in New Mexico, a location that offers an extraordinary combination of vast landscapes, rugged terrain, open skies, and relatively remote environments. These characteristics make the region especially suitable for a story about survival after the collapse of civilization. The wide landscapes can create a powerful sense of loneliness, while the natural environment provides a visually striking contrast with the damaged or abandoned elements of human civilization. New Mexico is also an important filmmaking destination because of its diverse scenery. Within the same region, filmmakers can find deserts, mountains, forests, open plains, rural communities, and distinctive geological formations. This variety gives a production team the flexibility to create several different environments without necessarily having to travel to completely different parts of the world. For a movie like The Dog Stars, this flexibility is extremely valuable. The story requires the audience to believe that the characters are living in a world where modern civilization has been disrupted. The filmmakers can therefore use natural landscapes to create the feeling of a much larger world beyond the characters' immediate surroundings. The remote nature of many New Mexico locations also helps create the atmosphere required for the film. In a conventional movie, a busy road, modern building, or crowded urban environment might be useful, but in a post-apocalyptic story, those same elements could destroy the illusion. Remote locations allow the filmmakers to minimize modern distractions and create an environment that feels isolated and unfamiliar. Another advantage is the natural lighting and dramatic landscapes available in the region. The wide skies and changing light conditions can contribute significantly to the visual atmosphere of a survival thriller. Sunrise, sunset, harsh daylight, shadows, and nighttime. Environments can all be used to communicate different emotions without relying entirely on dialogue. The locations also support the film's emphasis on the relationship between human beings and nature. Once civilization has collapsed, the natural environment becomes far more important to the characters. The landscape can represent both beauty and danger. It can provide space and resources, but it can also expose characters to isolation and uncertainty. For the filmmakers, shooting in real environments also provides an opportunity to create a stronger sense of authenticity. Instead of constructing every landscape digitally inside a studio, real locations give actors something physical to interact with. This can make performances feel more natural and can provide cinematographers with genuine textures, shadows, distances, and environmental details. At the same time, not everything visible in a post-apocalyptic movie necessarily exists exactly as it appears on location. Modern filmmaking often combines real locations with set construction and visual effects. A real landscape may be enhanced digitally, a building may be modified, or certain environmental details may be added during post-production. This allows filmmakers to maintain realism while achieving visual elements that would be difficult or impossible to create entirely in the real world. The choice of filming locations is therefore not simply a practical decision. It becomes part of the storytelling itself. The empty roads, enormous landscapes, isolated structures, and natural surroundings help communicate the emotional condition of the characters. The environment constantly reminds the audience that the world they once knew has changed. For Hollybuzz, one of the most interesting things about the filming locations of the Dog Stars is how they contribute to the movie's overall identity. The locations are not merely backgrounds behind the actors. They help create the atmosphere, establish the scale of the post-apocalyptic world, and reinforce the themes of isolation and survival. Ultimately, the filming locations help transform the story from something that exists on the pages of Peter Heller's novel into a physical cinematic world. By combining the natural landscapes of New Mexico with carefully selected production environments and visual effects, the filmmakers can create a world that feels vast, lonely, beautiful, and dangerous all at the same time. That visual environment is essential to the Dog Stars 2026, because when the audience looks at the screen, they should not simply see actors performing in a location. They should feel that they are looking at a world that has been fundamentally transformed and that the characters are genuinely living inside it. Now, let's go behind the scenes of the Dog Stars 2026 and look at some of the interesting facts surrounding the making of this highly anticipated post-apocalyptic thriller. While audiences will see the finished movie on the big screen, the production itself involves a huge amount of work from the director, actors, cinematographers, visual effects artists, stunt teams, production designers, and many other departments. One of the most interesting facts is that the film brings together Ridley, Scott, and Jacob Elordi for a story that requires a very different performance from the young actor. Elordi plays Hig, a pilot attempting to survive in a world devastated by a pandemic. Official promotional material shows Elordi working closely with Scott in the production, giving audiences a glimpse of the director's approach to the character and the film's atmosphere. Another interesting behind-the-scenes detail is the importance of Hig's dog to the production. The official studio material includes images of Jacob Elordi with the dog used in the film, whose name is Jasper. This is particularly significant because the animal is not simply a background detail. The relationship between Hig and his dog is an important emotional element of the story, meaning that working with the animal was an important part of creating the character's isolated world. The production also involved an impressive group of visual effects professionals. According to a visual effects industry breakdown, Charlie Henley served as production VFX supervisor, and Helen, Judd as production VFX producer. Several visual effects companies, including Rise, Untold Studios, Outpost VFX, Blue Bolt, Light VFX, and TPO VFX, contributed to the movie's visual work. This gives us an idea of how much technical collaboration was required to create the film's post-apocalyptic environment. The visual effects work is particularly important because the filmmakers needed to create a convincing world after a devastating global catastrophe. The movie combines real-world filmmaking with digital work to present environments and situations that would be extremely difficult to capture entirely through practical photography. This means that many of the visual details audiences see on screen are the result of collaboration between the camera crew, production designers, actors, and visual effects artists. Another interesting aspect of the production is the scale of the collaboration between Ridley Scott and his creative team. The official credits list Scott not only as director but also as one of the producers, alongside Michael Pruss, Mark L. Smith, and Cliff Roberts. This means Scott's involvement extends beyond simply directing individual scenes. He is also closely connected to the broader production of the film. The cast itself also created an interesting behind-the-scenes combination. Alongside Jacob Elordi and Josh Brolin, the film features Margaret Qualley, Guy Pearce, Benedict Wong, and Allison Janney, bringing performers with very different acting backgrounds into the same post-apocalyptic story. Gives the production a diverse ensemble and allows the movie to approach its characters from different perspectives. Another fascinating aspect is the relationship between the movie and Peter Heller's original novel. The filmmakers were adapting a literary work rather than creating the story completely from scratch. That means the production had the additional challenge of translating Heller's written world into visual storytelling. Mark L. Smith handled the screenplay adaptation, while Ridley Scott was responsible for turning that screenplay into the finished cinematic experience. The film also received an official behind-the-scenes featurette featuring Ridley Scott and Jacob Elordi. This is particularly useful for audiences because it provides a direct look at the filmmaking process and the relationship between the director and the lead actor. It gives viewers a glimpse into how the filmmakers approach the post-apocalyptic setting and Higgs' journey through that world. One of the biggest behind-the-scenes challenges was undoubtedly creating the correct tone. The Dog Stars is not simply a conventional action movie. The story combines survival, isolation, danger, and emotional drama. Therefore, the filmmakers had to create scenes that could feel physically dangerous while still maintaining the quieter, emotional atmosphere of the story. This balance is especially important for Ridley Scott because his filmmaking style often depends heavily on atmosphere. The environment, lighting, camera movement, production design, and sound all contribute to the audience's perception of the world. In a post-apocalyptic movie, even an empty landscape can communicate something about the character's emotional condition. The film's promotional material also reveals how much attention was given to aviation. Higg is a pilot, and aircraft are therefore an important part of his identity and his connection to the world around him. The movie's imagery includes aircraft sequences and aerial environments, which require considerable coordination between performers, camera teams, aviation specialists, and visual effects artists. Another interesting detail is that the movie has been officially classified R by the studio's published information. That rating indicates that the filmmakers were able to approach the darker and more mature aspects of the story without restricting themselves to a family-oriented tone. Ultimately, the behind-the-scenes story of the Dog Stars is just as interesting as the finished movie itself. It combines Ridley Scott's decades of filmmaking experience with a talented ensemble cast, a literary adaptation, extensive visual effects work, and the enormous logistical effort required to create a believable post-apocalyptic world. And perhaps the most interesting thing to remember is that what looks simple on screen, a pilot flying through an empty landscape, a survivor walking through a damaged world, or a man living alongside his dog, can require the combined efforts of dozens of departments and hundreds of professionals. That is the hidden side of filmmaking. The audience sees the final image, but behind that image is an enormous amount of planning, performance, technology, creativity, and teamwork. In the case of the Dog Stars, that behind-the-scenes collaboration is what allows Peter Heller's post-apocalyptic world to move from the pages of a novel into a fully realized cinematic experience. Now let's take a detailed look at the characters of the Dog Stars. 2026, because the strength of a post-apocalyptic story does not depend only on the destroyed world surrounding the characters. It depends on the people who are forced to live inside that world. When civilization collapses, personality becomes extremely important. Every decision can have consequences, trust becomes difficult, and even ordinary relationships can become a matter of survival. This is what makes the characters of the Dog Stars particularly interesting. The central character is Hig, played by Jacob Elordi. Hig is a pilot and one of the survivors of the catastrophic pandemic that has devastated society. At first glance, he might appear to be simply another survivor trying to stay alive. But his personality is much more complicated. Hig represents a person who has adapted to a dangerous new reality while still holding on to the emotional qualities of the world that existed before the catastrophe. One of Hig's most important characteristics is his sensitivity. He has survived a brutal environment, but he has not completely allowed that environment to destroy his ability to care. This makes him different from characters who respond to the collapse of society by becoming completely ruthless. Hig still feels the emotional weight of what has been lost, and that emotional sensitivity becomes an important part of his personality. At the same time, Hig is not weak. His experience as a pilot gives him valuable skills, and surviving in a post-apocalyptic world requires discipline, awareness, courage, and practical intelligence. He understands that danger can appear without warning and that survival requires preparation. His strength, however, is balanced by his emotional vulnerability, which makes him feel more like a real human being than a conventional action hero. Another important part of Hig's character is his sense of loneliness. The world around him has become dramatically smaller. The ordinary social connections that people take for granted have largely disappeared. This isolation affects how he thinks about the future and what he wants from life. His desire for communication and connection becomes one of the most important aspects of his character. Hig's relationship with his dog is also extremely significant. The dog provides him with companionship in an otherwise isolated existence. This relationship shows that Hig still needs emotional connection, even though the world around him has become dangerous. His bond with the animal also reveals his capacity for loyalty and affection. Another major character is Bangley, played by Josh Brolin. Bangley is very different from Hig, where Hig retains a strong emotional connection to the past and to other living beings. Bangley represents a much harder and more defensive approach to survival. He is experienced, heavily prepared, suspicious, and willing to take extreme measures when he believes that survival is at stake. Bangley's personality is shaped by practical survival instincts. He understands that the old rules of society may no longer protect anyone. In his mind, hesitation can be dangerous, trust can be exploited, and weakness can have fatal consequences. This makes him an intimidating character, but it also makes him an understandable product of the world in which he lives. The contrast between Hig and Bangley is one of the most important character dynamics in the story. They are not simply two survivors living together. They represent two different approaches to a broken world. Hig still looks for connection and meaning, while Bangley places greater emphasis on security and survival. Their differences create tension, but those differences can also make them stronger as a team. Bangley can therefore be viewed as a character who represents the hard side of survival. He is prepared to do things that Hig may find morally difficult. However, that does not necessarily make him a simple villain. His actions are connected to his understanding of the world. He has learned that survival requires constant caution, and his personality reflects that lesson. The relationship between Hig and Bangley is therefore complicated. There may be disagreements between them, but their survival also depends on cooperation. This creates an interesting question. How much can two very different people depend on each other when they do not necessarily share the same values? Another important presence in the film is Jasper, Hig's dog. Although Jasper is not a human character, his importance should not be underestimated. In a story about isolation, an animal can become a powerful source of emotional connection. Jasper represents loyalty and companionship, without the complicated expectations that often come with human relationships. The dog also helps reveal another side of Hig. A character can be extremely cautious and capable of defending himself, while still showing tenderness toward an animal. This contrast makes Hig's personality more complex. His relationship with Jasper reminds the audience that survival has not completely removed his ability to care for another living being. The film also features characters played by Margaret Qualley, Guy Pearce, Benedict Wong, and Allison Janney. Their presence expands the story beyond Hig and Bangley's isolated existence. These supporting characters help introduce different personalities, perspectives, and experiences into the world of the film. Margaret Qualley's character is particularly important because she introduces another human dimension to the story. Her presence creates opportunities for Hig's emotional world to become more complicated. Instead of existing entirely within a survival-focused environment, Hig is forced to confront questions about relationships, trust, and what kind of future might still be possible. Guy Pearce's character adds another layer to the film's human conflict. Pearce has frequently played characters with psychological complexity, and his presence in a story like The Dog Stars adds to the sense that the surviving characters cannot all be understood through simple categories such as good and bad. In a collapsed society, people's motivations can be shaped by fear, loss, survival, and personal history. Benedict Wong and Allison Janney further expand the ensemble and help create the impression that the post-apocalyptic world contains different types of survivors rather than a single uniform group. Each character can represent a different response to catastrophe, allowing the story to explore how people change when the rules of normal society disappear. One of the strengths of the character design is that the film does not need every character to react to the apocalypse in the same way. Some characters may seek security, others may seek companionship, and others may focus almost entirely on survival. These differences create dramatic tension and make the fictional world feel more believable. The characters can therefore be understood as different responses to the same question. What do you become when the world you knew no longer exists? Hig responds by trying to preserve his humanity. Bangley responds through extreme caution and preparedness. The other characters add further perspectives to this question. Together, they create a story in which survival is not only physical but also emotional and moral. The most interesting character conflict is therefore not necessarily about who is stronger or who can fight better. It is about what kind of person each character chooses to become. In a normal society, moral decisions are supported by laws, institutions, and social expectations. In a post-apocalyptic world, those structures may no longer exist. Characters must decide for themselves what is acceptable, what is necessary, and what they are willing to sacrifice. This makes Hig particularly important because his journey can be understood as an attempt to find a balance between survival and humanity. He cannot afford to be completely innocent, but he also does not want to become completely hardened. His character exists in that difficult space between the person he once was and the person the new world requires him to become. Bangley, meanwhile, represents the danger of allowing survival instincts to completely dominate a person's identity. His toughness is useful, but it also raises questions about what might be lost when fear becomes the foundation of every decision. Ultimately, the character analysis of The Dog Stars shows that the movie is not simply about people trying to survive after a catastrophe. It is about different human personalities confronting the same broken world in completely different ways. Hig represents hope, emotional connection, and the desire for something beyond survival. Bangley represents caution, strength, suspicion, and the harsh realities of staying alive. Jasper represents loyalty and companionship, while the supporting characters broaden the emotional and moral landscape of the story. That is what gives the characters their importance. The destroyed world provides the setting, but the characters provide the heart of the movie. Their choices, relationships, fears, and hopes determine what the story ultimately means now. Let's talk about the trailer. Views and public response to The Dog Stars 2026. For an upcoming movie, the trailer is one of the most important marketing tools because it gives audiences their first substantial look at the film's world, characters, atmosphere, and overall style. In the case of The Dog Stars, the trailer has attracted attention largely because of the combination of Ridley Scott, Jacob Elordi, Josh Brolin, and the post-apocalyptic story adapted from Peter Heller's novel. One of the biggest reasons people became interested in the trailer is the name, Ridley Scott. Scott already has a long history with science fiction and large-scale cinematic storytelling, so his involvement immediately created expectations among movie fans. Audiences who know his previous work naturally became curious about how he would approach a post-apocalyptic survival story and whether the film would carry the atmospheric, visual style associated with his filmmaking. The presence of Jacob Elordi also generated considerable interest. Elordi has become one of the most recognizable young actors of his generation, and the Dog Stars gives him an opportunity to take on a very different type of role. Instead of appearing primarily in contemporary settings, he is placed in a harsh, post-apocalyptic environment where survival and isolation are central to the character's experience. This contrast encouraged many viewers to pay attention to the trailer and consider how he would perform in the role of. In another major attraction was Josh Brolin, whose reputation for playing intense and physically demanding characters made his involvement particularly interesting. The trailer therefore introduced audiences to a combination of actors with different screen personalities, creating curiosity about the relationship between Hig and Bangley. The trailer also attracted attention because of its post-apocalyptic atmosphere. Rather than relying only on explosions and large-scale destruction, the promotional material emphasizes isolation, empty landscapes, survival, and a world that feels fundamentally different from ordinary modern life. This gives the movie a more serious and atmospheric identity and separates it from some of the more conventional action-focused films in the genre. The response to the trailer has also been influenced by the fact that The Dog Stars is an adaptation of a well-known novel by Peter Heller. Readers who were already familiar with the book had a particular reason to examine the trailer carefully. They could compare the visual interpretation with the world they had imagined while reading the novel, while people who had never read the book could approach the film without those expectations. Another interesting aspect of the public response is the discussion surrounding the movie's tone. The trailer suggests that the film is not simply a straightforward superhero-style blockbuster or a conventional action movie. Instead, it appears to combine survival, science fiction, suspense, and emotional drama. This has created curiosity about how much emphasis the finished movie will place on action and how much attention it will give to the psychological experiences of its characters. The visual presentation has also been an important part of the trailer's appeal. The landscapes, aircraft, isolated environments, and post-apocalyptic imagery help establish the scale of the world. Viewers can immediately see that the filmmakers are attempting to create an environment that feels vast and empty, rather than simply decorating a normal location with a few signs of destruction. However, it is important to make a distinction between public interest in a trailer and public opinion about the completed movie. Because The Dog Stars is scheduled for theatrical release on August 28, 2026, audiences have not yet had the opportunity to judge the finished film in the same way they would after watching it in cinemas. Therefore, reactions to the trailer should not be presented as final audience reviews of the movie itself. The exact number of trailer views can also change continuously across platforms. YouTube, social media platforms, studio websites, and other services may display different view counts, and those numbers can increase rapidly after promotional campaigns or new releases of the trailer. For that reason, it is better to describe the trailer as having generated significant interest and discussion rather than giving an unsupported exact number. The public response can therefore be understood through several major areas of interest. Some viewers are attracted by Ridley Scott's direction, others by Jacob Elordi's leading role, others by Josh Brolin and the supporting cast, and many are interested in the post-apocalyptic concept itself. Fans of the original novel are also watching closely to see how the adaptation translates the story from literature to cinema. There is also curiosity about whether the movie will successfully balance its different elements. Viewers want to know whether it can deliver the suspense expected from a thriller while maintaining the emotional depth of a character-driven survival story. They are also interested in whether Ridley Scott's visual approach will make the post-apocalyptic setting feel fresh and distinctive. Overall, the trailer has succeeded in doing one of the most important things a movie trailer needs to accomplish. It has created curiosity. It introduces enough of the world and characters to make audiences interested, while leaving important aspects of the story unexplained. For Hollybuzz, the key point is that the trailer's response should be viewed as early audience interest rather than a final verdict. The real public response will become much clearer after the film reaches theaters, when audiences can judge the complete story, performances, pacing, visual effects, and emotional impact. Until then, the trailer provides an early indication of the expectations surrounding The Dog Stars. And with Ridley Scott behind the camera, Jacob Elordi leading the cast, and Peter Heller's acclaimed novel providing the source material, there is certainly plenty for audiences to be curious about as the film approaches its release. Now, let's break down the trailer for The Dog Stars 2026 and look closely at what the filmmakers are showing us. The trailer gives us much more than a collection of action shots. It establishes the emotional background of Hig, introduces the dangerous world he is living in, presents the important characters, and gradually reveals the mystery that pushes him away from his isolated existence. The trailer begins by giving us a glimpse of Hig's life before the collapse. This is an extremely important choice, because it immediately creates a contrast between the world that once existed and the world that remains. We see Hig with his wife and their young dog Jasper, before the catastrophe completely changes his life. The trailer then shifts to a much darker reality, showing Hig alone and emotionally devastated after losing his wife. This contrast allows the audience to understand that the apocalypse is not simply a physical disaster. For Hig, it is also a deeply personal tragedy. One of the most emotional moments presented in the trailer comes when Hig is asked what he remembers about the day the world ended. His answer connects the global catastrophe to a deeply personal memory of his wife. This moment is important because it tells us that the movie is not going to treat the apocalypse merely as a spectacular event. For Hig, the end of civilization is connected to the loss of someone he loved, and that loss continues to influence the way he sees the world. The trailer then introduces us to Hig's new reality. He is living in a largely abandoned environment with his dog, Jasper, and his survivalist partner, Bangley, played by Josh Brolin. Their existence is highly controlled and defensive. They have created a system designed to protect them from the dangers outside. This immediately establishes an important contrast between Hig and Bangley. One is emotionally searching for something beyond survival, while the other appears far more focused on security and staying alive. Bangley's presence in the trailer is particularly important because he represents the harsh reality of the post-apocalyptic world. He is heavily armed, experienced, and extremely cautious. His attitude suggests that he understands the new world as a place where trust can be dangerous. The trailer, therefore, establishes him not simply as Hig's companion, but as a character who may challenge Hig's decisions and his desire to search for something beyond their isolated existence. The trailer also gives us a strong impression of the post-apocalyptic environment. We see empty and damaged spaces, abandoned structures, aircraft, wilderness, and evidence that the old civilization has collapsed. One striking image shows the remains of Denver City Hall surrounded by wild dogs, emphasizing how nature and abandoned human environments have become intertwined. The visuals are important because the trailer does not need to explain the collapse of civilization through long conversations. Instead, the environment tells the story. Empty spaces and damaged landmarks communicate that the world people once recognized is gone. The audience can understand the scale of the catastrophe simply by looking at what has been left behind. Then comes the major turning point of the trailer, the mysterious radio transmission. Hig receives a signal while flying, and this seemingly small event becomes enormously important. In a world where communication has almost disappeared, hearing another human voice can represent something much larger than information. It can represent the possibility that Hig is not truly alone. This transmission is essentially the mystery at the center of the trailer. Who is sending the signal? Where is it coming from? Is the person on the other end trustworthy? And most importantly, does the transmission prove that there is still something worth searching for beyond Hig's isolated existence? The trailer deliberately does not answer all of these questions. Instead, it uses the transmission to create curiosity. Hig has already built a relatively secure life, but the possibility of another human connection forces him to reconsider everything. The trailer therefore transforms the story from one about simply surviving into one about taking a risk in search of hope. We also get our first substantial look at Margaret Qualley's character, Seema, who is a medic. Her presence suggests that Hig's journey will eventually bring him into contact with other survivors and different ways of living in the post-apocalyptic world. Seema also becomes important because she represents another possible form of human connection for Hig. The trailer introduces Guy Pearce as Pops, Seema's father and a former Navy SEAL. His appearance adds another layer of uncertainty to the story. A former military figure in a world where survival has become extremely difficult naturally raises questions about his experience, his motivations, and his relationship with the other survivors. Interestingly, The trailer also gives audiences brief glimpses of Allison Janney and Benedict Wong, although their roles are not fully explained. This is a deliberate marketing choice. Instead of revealing every character's importance, the trailer keeps certain details hidden so that viewers have reasons to discover them in the complete movie. Another major feature of the trailer is its emphasis on Higgs' aircraft. Because Higg is a pilot, flying is not simply an action element. It is part of his identity and his way of exploring a world that has become almost impossible to navigate normally. The aircraft gives him a unique ability to move beyond the isolated area where he lives and search for the source of the mysterious transmission. The flying sequences also increase the visual scale of the movie. Instead of keeping the story entirely on the ground, the trailer moves between intimate character moments and large aerial environments. This creates a contrast between the small, personal story of one survivor and the enormous scale of the devastated world around him. As the trailer progresses, the tone becomes increasingly tense. The early scenes establish loss and loneliness, while later scenes introduce danger, weapons, pursuit, and uncertainty. This change in tone tells us that Higgs' decision to search for the transmission is not going to be a simple journey. Leaving the safety of his established routine means entering a world where he cannot predict what he will encounter. One particularly interesting aspect of the trailer is the way it presents survival versus humanity. The official marketing describes the movie as a story in which survival is instinct while humanity is a choice. That idea is reflected throughout the trailer. Higg has the ability to remain isolated and protect himself, but he continues to search for communication and connection. His willingness to take risks suggests that simply staying alive may not be enough for him. The trailer also creates an interesting contrast between fear and hope. Nearly every part of Higgs' world tells him to remain cautious, yet the radio signal gives him a reason to believe that something better may still exist. This tension appears to be one of the major emotional engines of the movie. From a visual perspective, the trailer establishes a bleak but cinematic atmosphere. The combination of large landscapes, abandoned environments, aircraft, survival equipment, and human characters creates the feeling of a world that is both beautiful and dangerous. The visual approach is particularly significant because Ridley Scott has a long history of creating memorable environments in science fiction and survival films. The final trailer, released in July 2026, pushes the tension further and gives audiences additional glimpses of the dangerous world Higg must navigate. The studio's official announcement confirms that this final trailer was released on July 14th, ahead of the film's theatrical opening. However, one of the smartest things about the trailers is what they do not reveal. They give us the basic premise, introduce the central characters, show the mysterious transmission, and establish the dangers of the world. But they avoid explaining the complete journey or resolving the central mystery. This allows the audience to understand the basic story without destroying the suspense. So, when we break down the trailer, we can see a clear progression. Higgs' old life, his devastating loss, his isolated survival, his relationship with Bangley and Jasper, the mysterious radio transmission, his decision to investigate it, and the dangers waiting beyond his safe environment. The trailer therefore works as a miniature version of the movie's emotional journey. It begins with what Higg has lost, shows us the harsh world he has inherited, and then introduces the possibility that something or someone may still be waiting beyond the horizon. And that is perhaps the most important message hidden inside the trailer. The world may have ended, but Higgs' search for connection has not ended. The radio signal gives him a reason to move forward. And the trailer leaves us with the central question that the full movie will have to answer: is there really hope left in this broken world? And what will Higg have to risk to find it? Video ending. And with that, we come to the end of our complete journey through The Dog Stars 2026. From its post-apocalyptic world and powerful characters to its story, themes, performances, visuals, and the creative vision of Ridley Scott, we have explored the many different elements that make this movie such an interesting cinematic experience. What makes The Dog Stars stand out is that it is not simply a story about the end of civilization. It is a story about what happens to human beings when everything they once considered normal suddenly disappears. Through Higgs' journey, we see loneliness, survival, fear, friendship, loss, and most importantly, the desire to find something worth living for. The movie reminds us that surviving physically is only one part of the human struggle. Sometimes finding hope, trusting another person, protecting someone we love, or simply having a reason to wake up the next morning can be just as important as staying alive. Ridley Scott's direction brings this world to life through a combination of atmosphere, powerful imagery, emotional storytelling, and large-scale filmmaking, while the performances help us connect with the people living inside this devastated world. Whether you are already a fan of the original novel, a follower of Ridley Scott's work, a fan of Jacob Elordi and the rest of the cast, or simply someone who enjoys post-apocalyptic stories, The Dog Stars gives audiences plenty to discuss and explore. They give us the basic premise, introduce the central characters, show the mysterious transmission, and establish the dangers of the world. But they avoid explaining the complete journey or resolving the central mystery. This allows the audience to understand the basic story without destroying the suspense. So, when we break down the trailer, we can see a clear progression. Haig's old life, his devastating loss, his isolated survival, his relationship with Bangley and Jasper, the mysterious radio transmission, his decision to investigate it, and the dangers waiting beyond his safe environment. The trailer therefore works as a miniature version of the movie's emotional journey. It begins with what Hig has lost, shows us the harsh world he has inherited, and then introduces the possibility that something or someone may still be waiting beyond the horizon. And that is perhaps the most important message hidden inside the trailer. The world may have ended, but Haig's search for connection has not ended. The radio signal gives him a reason to move forward. And the trailer leaves us with the central question that the full movie will have to answer: is there really hope left in this broken world? And what will Hig have to risk to find it? Video ending! And with that, we come to the end of our complete journey through The Dog Stars 2026. From its post-apocalyptic world and powerful characters to its story, themes, performances, visuals, and the creative vision of Ridley Scott, we have explored the many different elements that make this movie such an interesting cinematic experience. What makes The Dog Stars stand out is that it is not simply a story about the end of civilization. It is a story about what happens to human beings when everything they once considered normal suddenly disappears. Through Hig's journey, we see loneliness, survival, fear, friendship, loss, and most importantly, the desire to find something worth living for. The movie reminds us that surviving physically is only one part of the human struggle. Sometimes finding hope, trusting another person, protecting someone we love, or simply having a reason to wake up the next morning can be just as important as staying alive. Ridley Scott's direction brings this world to life through a combination of atmosphere, powerful imagery, emotional storytelling, and large-scale filmmaking, while the performances help us connect with the people living inside this devastated world. Whether you are already a fan of the original novel, a follower of Ridley Scott's work, a fan of Jacob Elordi and the rest of the cast, or simply someone who enjoys post-apocalyptic stories, The Dog Stars gives audiences plenty to discuss and explore.